Welcome to the next edition of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. My name is Brad Nadelt. We've got Lindsay Parry with us once again. And today we are deep diving. We are going deep into a topic that is very close to our heart, and particularly because it is so important for the over 50s runner. We're talking all things recovery, and we are going to go super deep today. Lindsay, nice to have you with us. How are things going, by the way?
Yeah, very good, thanks. And as I start to approach 50, these topics become more and more relevant to me personally. But yeah, as you know, been close to my heart basically since my dad was 50. So that's going on 25 years now.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive straight into it. Lindsay, we're going to be talking sort of why it's so important. We're going to be talking about specific recovery techniques and how to fast track your recovery, because I think that is a huge pain point within our audience, people wanting to recover from sessions faster. We're going to talk about injury prevention and recovery, and we're going to talk about some recovery tools. But let's take a step back and talk recovery as an overall concept. Why is recovery so important for the over 50s athlete?
So, like, very simply, in the absence of recovery, we don't improve. So, it's a very common misconception that people improve while they are training. We improve in response to the training, but that improvement takes place when we are recovering. So it's literally always been an issue. But obviously, as we get older, certain functions within the human body start to decline. But most notably, there's a very definite decrease in actual physical strength and in the number of muscle fibers available for um, performing the movement that we are after. So much so that right now in the media, the kind of buzzword is sarcopenia. That in the general population is obviously a problem because people just aren't moving as much as they used to 20, 30 years ago. But the bottom line is that it's enough of an issue that there is this new buzzword out there in the media. So for athletes or people over 50 who want to perform, you need to understand that you've had this 2, 3 decades long gradual loss of muscle mass. And ultimately, that's part of the reason why, as you get older, everything you do in training starts to feel harder than it used to. We kind of look at that and go, well, no pain, no gain, or yes, I'm getting older, so obviously I have to work harder to achieve what I used to achieve. But in reality, what's happening on the ground is that you are trying to do the same amount of work with less. And what that means is that post recovery needs more attention. It takes longer. And that gets us into this overtraining, fatigued all the time, training with sore muscles all the time. And so we don't get the improvement that we used to get. So you end up losing on both ends of the equation. You lose on the end where you can't perform the tasks that you used to, plus you can't get the improvements that you used to get. So you just go downhill, downhill, downhill. And that's why, as you get over 50, you've got to focus harder on recovery so that you can reverse that trend. So many people do this badly, Brad, that if you get it right, then in the short term, people almost see like a renewed second life of running because they actually start to run times that they last ran a decade ago, sometimes longer than that. Um, but that is all linked to fixing recovery in your 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah, Lindsay, I know you touched on it, but this for me, like you and I have been working together for a long time, like well over a decade, probably closer to two now. And I don't come from a sports science background, so I'm just a normal recreational runner. And this took me so long to actually understand. And I think for a lot of for the layperson, we don't really get this when it comes to recovery. And I always used to think, because I mean, I grew up in a household where my dad used to run, and to this day, I'll tell him I go for a run, and if like I'm not busting a lung, he doesn't think I'm working hard enough. And for a lot of people, they think that the benefits of training come in the session that they're doing. So at the time that they're running. So if they're running fast and it feels like they're dying, then they're getting the benefit. But the truth of the matter is that's not actually physiologically how it works. You actually get the benefit of the training in the time that you recover. Your body builds a little bit stronger. Won't you just really unpack that? Because I think that is such an important concept that people miss when it comes to recovery. And that is actually the crux of this entire thing.
100%. So look, when we exercise, that puts a load on the body, puts a load on the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, the bones, the joints, puts a load on the physiological system. So in other words, your body's ability to take oxygen, send it through the blood to the working muscles, to take the glycogen that's already in the muscles and use that for energy, to take fat, put it into the blood, take it down to use that for energy, and also to remove the byproducts of energy metabolism. So pretty much as soon as you exercise, that puts pressure on all of those systems. Okay. Now, what happens after exercise is the response from the body in relation to that stress. Okay. When we do an interval session, for example, and that's a good example because that almost always overloads that system. So in other words, whether you get too tired to quite finish the set, or if there's stiffness because the muscles have taken some damage from doing that set, you're gasping for air at the end. So obviously there was a shortage of oxygen that was supplied, whatever those shortcomings are, in that period post-exercise, the body starts to repair all the damage, but then it goes, well, hang on, how do I improve the system? Okay, now I've got to work on improving the system. And if we leave enough time between those bouts of exercise, then the body has the ability to actually make itself better than it was before. And that's how the system of progressive overload works. You load, you allow the body to do the repair and the improvements, and then we go again. Okay. Now, unfortunately, as we get older, that cycle lengthens. But because we're stuck in this rut of believing that we have to work harder, what actually happens is that we inadvertently shorten that cycle. So even if we allow the body enough time just to repair the damage or fix up the shortcomings or remove all the byproducts of the energy metabolism, we kind of stagnate. We hit this stalemate where we don't improve. And then, of course, because we're aging, we actually go through this period where we just slowly but surely get worse. Okay. So that's the pure recovery stuff, Brad. Like in terms of like what happens between the bouts of hard exercise. Really, what I want to just touch on now, and I'm sure we'll unpack it, but we exacerbate that problem, particularly when we're over 50, because what we do between the sessions also compromises the recovery. In other words, the easy sessions that are there purely for aerobic development and for toughening up soft tissues, but in a really slow, progressive way, we get into that mindset that you mentioned just now, that if I don't feel like I'm working hard, I'm not getting the benefits. And so what then happens is that we are doing our easy sessions too hard, and then that compounds what's happening in the hard sessions. And it all contrives to get to a point where I'm not improving. Plus, I can't do my high intensity sessions properly anyway. So I'm not getting the true benefit from those sessions. I'm not recovering well. So then I don't sleep well, which we're definitely going to dive into just now. I lose my appetite, so I don't eat well. So you can see how this like cycle just starts and it all starts with this inability to allow ourselves to recover from our sessions, and exacerbate that by training too hard on our easy days.
Yeah, and I think that really does lay the groundwork for what we wanted to talk about today, and how to optimize recovery as an over 50s runner particularly. And I think let's delve into some of the recovery techniques that really do make a difference. And I think we're bombarded with messages online and on social media of the latest tools and these little gadgets and these little pulls. But the truth of the matter is, if you don't get the basics and the foundation of recovery right, the rest of the stuff doesn't actually matter. So let's talk about some of the most effective recovery techniques, in your opinion, for the over 50s runner.
Yeah, so I like to look at this as a triangle. So, Brad, if everyone can just picture this triangle, okay? And the triangle has recovery as its point, and the base has rest and sleep in one corner, and it's got nutrition in the other corner. And if we get those two things right, then that triangle base can get bigger and bigger, and it can support a much bigger triangle, which means that our triangle, or the recovery, the point at the top, can go higher and higher. Okay. And then that middle part can also then be filled up with the auxiliary or complementary forms of recovery. But honestly, if we're not getting this base right, if we don't fix the rest and sleep, then and the nutrition, then we're really going to be in this low cycle of just a very small triangle with a very low base, and no matter what else we chuck in there, it's just not going to allow us to go up. So I think I don't want to say that it's the easiest one to fix, but it's the easiest one to talk about. So we're going to go there first, and that is this rest and sleep combination and how important that is for recovery. Okay. So rest is the easiest one to implement, okay? Because if we just look at our weekly plan and our monthly plan, we can figure out little spots in there where we can both rest and or have some weeks where we just take it a little bit easier. Now, on those rest days, those are classic times where the body can really have like this supercharged efforts to fix and improve, because it's not donating resources to all sorts of other things, and it's definitely not giving resources to the actual exercise that you've got to do every day, and a lot of people are training twice a day. So literally finding a rest day a week can already make a huge difference to your recovery as you are going over 50, 60, 70. Now, I'm talking about exercise in general terms, but if we focus it straight to running, then you can give yourself 2 to 3 days where you aren't running. And a lot of people are running 5, 6, 7 days a week. So if we cut that back to 4, 5, depending on where you are on the performance spectrum, that's already giving your body this huge opportunity to recover from the training that you are doing. Okay. And it's immediately going to help you with sleep, which I'm going to dive into shortly. So that's the very simplistic and easy way to get really fast results. And people who've been around and maybe been on a webinar or whatever with us will know the story of my father. And literally that was the change. From 7 days a week, we trained 4 days a week, and that kicked off a decade of improvement. Okay, I'm exaggerating slightly, 6 years. So, his problem started when he was 50. We started fixing them when he was 54. So that's kicked off 6 years of improvement. But what it allowed him to do at 60 was run the same times as he ran when he was 50. Okay, so that's where I got the decade from. But that's really it, is create these little pockets where you can rest. And then within that, look for gaps. And I like to work on 3 or 4 week cycles, depending on how deep in the hole you are, or what sort of problems you are suffering from at the moment that are compromising your recovery. We might load you for 2 weeks and then come down a little bit in the 3rd week, or we might load you for 3 weeks and then come down a little bit in the 4th week. But those are the rest part of the sleep rest corner of the triangle. And if you get that right, you're already making huge improvements, and you're probably going to help yourself sleep better. So if you are, and as we get older, it is a little bit harder to sleep. I was complaining to my wife literally this morning to say that I had a good night's sleep, but I just keep waking up. I'm not awake for long, seconds. But I also know that as I get older, those little interruptions in my sleep are going to get longer, and I'm going to struggle more and more to fall asleep. Okay. And that's the kind of stuff that getting adequate rest from the exercise will also help with that, because it'll lower the stress that you're under, it'll drop your cortisol levels, and that'll help you with your sleep. Okay. Now moving on to sleep. Some of the reason why we sleep poorly is just bad habits. Okay. So if we can fix those, we can improve the quality of our sleep. So I'm always mindful about, okay, how much sleep do we need? And then we talk about an amount of sleep, and then people are like, forget about it. I can never get there. I work too much, blah, blah. So I try to stay away from number of hours of sleep and really go about how can we improve the quality of the sleep that you are getting, okay? And a lot of that can be improved just by cleaning up bad habits. So for me, the worst of those habits and the easiest to fix is what you've got in your bedroom. Okay? So if you've got a TV in your bedroom that's got a standby red light, that is affecting your ability to sleep. And certainly when we wake up in the night, things that emit light absolutely cause extra distraction and they compromise the quality of our sleep. A cell phone, particularly one that's beeping or going off in the night, that's a huge one for really compromising your sleep. And then these bright clocks. People like to have a huge clock with bright shining lights that they can just touch it and it turns on and they see the time, or even worse, it's just on all the time. You don't even have to touch it. So that's stuff that we can really work on to improve the quality of our sleep, and in particular improve our ability to fall asleep if we do wake up in the night. Okay? We want it dark, we want it quiet and coolish. If you can get those three conditions right, your sleep quality is going to improve immensely. So make sure you've got curtains that cut out the light so that you really can sleep well once you are in bed. And then the other one is really just what we do as we move towards bed. Okay. Can we get into bed a little bit earlier? And when we get into bed, can we be tired when we get into bed? So watching TV in bed, scrolling through a phone before you lie down, working on your laptop, those are not great habits. You want to try to, I don't know, read a book, talk to your significant other, stay away from stressful things. So the research showed that the actual screen time was really bad. What the research is actually showing now is that it's less the stimulation from the light and more the stimulation from what you're seeing. So, watching news before you're going to bed and pushing up your anxiety, those are bad. Pushes up cortisol, makes it harder for you to sleep. Um, and then if you're regularly getting to bed after 10 o'clock at night, which is common, and maybe not so easy to fix, but it's another thing that if you can fix it, it just greatly improves the quality of your recovery while you sleep. Okay. So because we are diurnal and we've effectively evolved to be awake in the day and sleep at night, a lot of what happens at night is linked to hormonal releases based on our circadian rhythms. And if we can get into bed before 10, we get higher growth hormone, higher testosterone release, and that really improves our recovery. So I know we want to do a deep dive, Brad, but I don't want to dive too deep into the hormones. But suffice it to say that if you're regularly getting into bed after midnight, that grossly compromises your ability to recover from exercise.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in that we are going deep on the recovery side of things, but sleep is a superpower on its own. And we are going to do an episode specifically on sleep for the over 50s runner. That's coming up in a few weeks from now as well. We've got that on our plan to do. And it's fascinating once you dig into the research and actually figure out what it's doing. And once you want, again, Lindsay, as you said, like, if you say 8 hours, people just go, well, I can't get 8 hours. But even if it's just half an hour more than what you're currently getting on an average, that makes a huge difference. And we're going to dig into a lot of the research in an upcoming episode. For me, that has been a game changer, is sorting my sleep out. But we've spoken about the rest and the sleep side. Let's look at the other corner of that pyramid and how that impacts your recovery.
Yeah, and so nutrition again is key. And I'm always mindful with nutrition, because to unpack all of it, it is another podcast. And of course, because it's so important, we will do a podcast. But I think the key broad strokes here are that we need energy for exercise and we need energy to recover from exercise, and we need building blocks so that the body can repair the damage that was done during exercise. Okay, so again, a lot of these things feel like they're in threes, but If we are compromising on nutrition, we are making it harder to exercise. We are making it harder to recover from exercise, and we're making it much harder for the body to repair the damage that's done from exercise. Okay, so that's why nutrition is absolutely so important. And so to try and simplify it in terms of giving you something useful, like what can we do about it, is really, for a start, split your nutrition day into two broad categories. One is in exercise, which by definition literally means everything that happens while we are exercising and the first hour after exercise. So that is your, excuse me, that is your in exercise nutrition. And then we've got our between exercise nutrition. Okay, so your in exercise nutrition, the most important aspect to that is providing energy for the exercise. Okay. Now, sorry, to start providing the energy for recovery. Okay, so those are the important aspects of in nutrition. Okay. So, and you can fuel for exercise between. Okay. I know it's starting to sound complicated, but stay with me. I'm gonna get to the point shortly. Okay. So we can fuel for the exercise between. If we are eating well, we're eating healthy, we're eating balanced, we can have enough exercise stored, enough exercise. We can have enough energy stored for the exercise that's coming. However, what's super important about the in exercise nutrition is that first little window of recovery. We cannot recover properly if we don't start with the recovery process during that in exercise window, which is directly after exercise for the next hour. Okay, so that's just the important part to bear in mind for what I want to say here. Okay, now for performance nutrition, and to perform well in running specifically, we've got to have an adequate muscle glycogen carbohydrate supply. Okay. Now, what's really important here is to understand that during exercise and the window, that our window after exercise, that is the part where we can get carbohydrates into the working muscles without the impact of insulin. Okay, so for people who are listening to this that want to shut down because they're into fasting and it's high protein diets and high fats and they're generating for fat metabolism, for performance exercise to improve, carbohydrates are important. And you've got this window during exercise and for that first hour of exercise where there isn't an effect from insulin. And so, if we are taking in, and we must be taking in carbohydrates in that immediate window after exercise, we immediately then reload muscle glycogen, and that is a crucial step in the start of the recovery cycle. Okay, so you will immediately start to feel better in subsequent runs if you just top up your muscle glycogen immediately after exercise. The most important sessions that you need to do that in: any exercise that's lasting an hour and a half or longer, and any high intensity exercise. Those two exercise bouts massively reduce muscle glycogen during exercise, and then we need to top it up. Okay. Thereafter, we need to provide energy and building materials. So if you're providing enough protein and fats in the in between, you fine. We don't have to get proteins in early. There's obviously some research that shows that if we do get in some protein earlier, the repair process just starts sooner. So that is important. But what's much more important is that there is enough available so that this recovery process can literally be ongoing and taking place all the time. So we want a balanced approach between exercise, where we are taking in some more complex carbohydrates. So here is where you'll stay away from the sugars, the sugary drinks, etc., and go to less refined stuff. That is the most important part for in between. Yeah, and then we want to get in enough protein and the fats. And this is where it gets a bit complicated with over 50s, because our appetite definitely is suppressed as we get older. So it is a little bit harder for us to consume large amounts of food. And that's why you need to be intentional about making sure that you've got everything on your plate that you need. Okay. And I know we'll touch on supplementation too, Brad, but it's when we are really struggling to get in what we need to get in that we can then turn to some supplementation. And then if we're getting this nutrition slash sleep and rest part of the triangle right, then supplementation falls for me in this auxiliary or supplementary category, where we can then improve more on what we are doing. And then we get this middle part of the triangle where there's a few things that we can do that really help with those last few percentages of improvement. But we've got to get this base right. Otherwise, the saying pouring good money after bad applies. Those things aren't going to help enough to overcome this bad base that we've built.
Cool. Lindsay, I love that. And it actually reminded me of a comment that we had on one of our YouTube videos probably a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And it was when you touched on this glycogen loading after a session and making sure that you loading or reloading in that window. And the person who was commenting was saying, well, that's great, but like I can't sit down for a meal within 20 minutes of an exercise because I've got to get home after going to gym, for example, and shower and that sort of thing. So it's just not practical. Give us a practical example. I mean, you want to start reloading, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to sit down and have a meal within that time frame straight after a session. There are easier ways practically to do it. What does this look like practically, the reloading, and then with regards to what we need to for the rest of the building block?
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, great question. And that's when I always realize when you think you're saying something, but you're not quite saying it. And that's really the point that I was trying to make, Brad, around the lack of insulin response. So really what that means in that first hour is that fruit juice is going to do the trick. We just want sugar. And if we're taking in sugar, it's going to be reloading. So that can come in the form of coffee with milk in it. It can be tea, milky tea. It can be in the form of one of these recovery drinks that will then have a little bit of protein in it too. It like what we call in South Africa and the UK, I think, a chocolate milk, but effectively like a milk-based, a flavored milk is really where I'm going with that. Will be good. So sugar is effective in this particular scenario. I think that's key. And then after you've had the shower and the whatever, then you sit down to your meal. Then you'll want something like more complex carbohydrate. So then I would, and also what's quite practical in this scenario, sorry, Brad, because it's very easy to do, is like a bowl of cereal, because that's super easy. And again, if it's in that first half an hour, it's going to be assimilated quickly. When we get out of that hour, then you want to look more towards things like eggs on a rye toast, or a oats with nuts. So more complex breakfast is really where I'm going with that, and a more balanced meal on the plate.
Right, fantastic, Lindsay. I think that does give us some practical examples of what we can do. Let's talk about some of those auxiliary ones. And I started this podcast by saying that the markets will want you to believe that these supplements are going to help you do this and those socks are going to help you do that. But as you said, if you don't get the base of that triangle right, the rest of the stuff doesn't have the impact that you want it to. It works, but it's not going to work as well if you don't get the other stuff. So let's talk about some of those auxiliary things. Let's talk about things like supplements. Let's talk about things like recovery boots, as an example, foam rolling, those sorts of things. How do those things impact recovery? What works in your opinion, and what should people be looking to?
Yeah, and again, I'd like to look at it as like a hierarchy of needs. So, if you're eating really well, and you have a good ability to plan your day, and you're not skipping meals, and you're eating quite a balanced plate, then that reduces your load on supplements. I mean, there's still some supplements that I feel are important as you go into your over 50s. But if you're getting those things right, then you can stay away from your muscle milks and whey proteins, and meal replacements. You don't need them. If you're struggling a little bit with nutrition, I still feel like it's important to be getting your kind of veggies, and vitamins and minerals that are important to get from certain fruits like the berries, and to get from the vegetables. But from a basic energy and building blocks point of view, then something like a balanced meal replacement might be something you need to look at to just top up on the calories. If you are someone that really struggles with protein, for example, so you're a vegetarian, and you can definitely get enough protein as a vegetarian, but then you just really have to look at quantity. So then it sometimes can be a question of, can you eat the amount of vegetable proteins that you need? So in that scenario, like a pea protein might be super valuable for a vegetarian or a vegan. So there are these things that you need to look at within. So from a macronutrient point of view, am I getting enough? Yes, awesome. I don't need to go out and spend money on meal replacements and the like. No, then yeah, that's what I need to do. Okay. Then the next level of hierarchy, okay, what are the things that are either slightly lacking as we get older, or that we can have more of, that are going to help us in the repair process. Okay. Stuff like creatine, that's been shown to have really good improvement. So that's something you've got to take every day, which is a problem for me. I'll be honest. It's very difficult for me to build these habits to take every day. But creatine, again, is one of those that I've had a personal positive benefit from. So I just try to remember it most days. And I think it's just very important to remember to take it every day for the first 2 to 3 weeks, and then thereafter, whenever you remember. And hopefully you're not only remembering every 2 or 3 weeks, otherwise that's a problem. Some collagen, L-glutamine. So these are things that are really going to help with muscle and joint health. And then if you live somewhere where you are not getting tons of sunlight, then like a vitamin D supplementation. But you've got to be a little bit careful when we jump into these kind of vitamin D, Ks, etc., the fat soluble vitamins, because you can also take too many of those. But if you live somewhere where there's not a lot of sunlight, or you have really tough winters, or for whatever reason you really seldom can get outside during daylight hours, you might want to look at something like a vitamin D. Has like really good properties in recovery and boosting the immune system so that you don't get sick. So, but those will be things, Brad, that are on top of making sure we've got this base ready. And those are probably the supplements that have shown the best efficacy, or at least in research, have shown some definite improvements to the user.
All right, cool. So that's on the supplement front. Let's talk about some of the gadgets that people use. So let's talk about those. I don't even know what they're called. Those recovery boots that like inflate. Let's talk about foam rollers as an example. Let's maybe talk about ice baths. I know you're a huge fan of ice baths, not, but those sorts of things. Let's talk about some of those modalities.
Look, on one hand, it's lucky that we don't have time to do all of them, okay? Because otherwise, I think people love shortcuts, but every one of these things takes a little bit of time out of your day. So whether it's going to a massage therapist or using a Theragun to self-massage, foam rolling, those are kind of your three um, massage techniques that you can use. Then we've got compression socks and compression boots, which absolutely have some advantages, but also takes time. Yeah, and then you mentioned the dreaded ice bath there, or cold water immersion, as it's called. And these are all very good complementary forms of recovery. And I think for me, the important thing with them is finding the one that you both enjoy the most, or as one guy said to me once, for him, it's about finding the one that he dislikes the least. But they do help. So I personally, I find massage, Theraguns, and foam rolling to be a fantastic relief. It just helps me to and sorry, I'm going to put mobility um, into that same category, because I find that that's for me the biggest advantage of massage, Theragun, foam rolling, and then doing my mobility drills, is that it keeps me feeling loose and supple, and it allows me to identify spots on the body where something's not going right, which is generally a sign that I'm out of balance. Or maybe I've been neglecting strength training, but now we're jumping into a totally different podcast. But there are definite both recovery benefits, but also just in terms of how you feel, keeping you supple and mobile. So that's the one group which is really great, and a regular massage slash foam roll, Theragun, mobility helps so much with that. Then we've got compression socks and compression boots. And really, what those are trying to achieve, and they do achieve, is the body is prone to exaggeration. Okay. So, in other words, when we need repair, part of that repair process is an inflammatory process. So, we send all the things down to where they need it. We send too many, and then we get this inflammation, and that inflammation causes pain. Okay. So, part of reducing that recovery cycle is with the compression and the compression boots, is that it reduces the inflammation, because the compression itself means there's less space for all these things to come into. But what it's also doing, and in particular with the boots, is that it's improving circulation. So it's both improving the body's ability to get the stuff there quicker, at the same time making sure that it's not exaggerated, but it's also helping to flush it out. So that's what's happening with the compression. And yes, it absolutely does work. Again, it's time consuming, because you got to put these things on and then just park off there for 20 to 45 minutes, or whatever the case may be. And then we've got the ice bath, or cold water immersion, which is doing the same thing. It's literally reducing the amount of inflammation. So it's shortening the post-exercise recovery time by making sure that there's enough of the good guys that come to do the repair, but that isn't overcrowded and then causing that inflammation. So for me, it's about finding the one that is the most pleasant for you, and practical. So, a cold water immersion, that one's particularly impractical, because it generally means we have to go somewhere, or at the very least, we've got to manufacture ice and throw it in a bath, and it's a big palaver. But they are great complementary forms. If you can do one or two of them as an added extra in this third layer, then you are really starting to help your recovery and improve things.
Yeah, absolutely. Lindsay, let's talk a little bit about sort of active recovery versus passive recovery. And we've spoken about rest and how important that is. And a lot of people feel like they need their fix of exercise every single day, so they're hesitant to take rest days. But what's the difference between active and passive recovery, and which is better?
Yeah, so that's a fabulous question. And the listeners might note that near the beginning, I mentioned this idea of cutting down the running. So I spoke a little bit about general exercise, and then I spoke specifically about reducing the number of days, the frequency of the running. And that then lends this window where it creates some space for us to do strength training that we also need to do. But it opens this door for doing things like aqua jogging or getting on an elliptigo or getting on a bicycle, non-impact cardiovascular exercise that can help with some active recovery. And the trick to that, though, Brad, is that it can't be seen as like a lot of people also jump on the exercise bike and then they want to crush out a session, feel like they've exercised. Fine, we've removed the impact. And so that is a plausible way of getting more hard training in the week without compromising the recovery, but it cannot be seen as an active recovery. I think that's just the differentiation that I want to make. If you're going to use it as active recovery, it has to be light intensity. Like if we're going to give it a name, let's call it zone 1. Very easy, getting up to, I'd say, almost like walking intensity. So we increasing the heart rate by maybe 20 beats per minute. And then what that does, Brad, is it brings new blood to flush through the muscles, and it removes old blood. So it's just, and I mean, even when I say that, that sounds ridiculous because it makes it sound like the blood is just parking there in our muscles in between exercise, which it's not. But I'm just trying to highlight the principle here is that it really just flushes out. It just speeds that process up. And in a good 20 minutes, you can really just flush out all the byproducts of, or a lot of the byproducts of exercise. And so it's a really effective tool. It's better on one hand because it is good to have the blood moving through those muscles and flushing everything out. But on the other hand, it can be more mentally draining. We know that psychological stress causes its own inhibition of recovery. So if you've got easy access to it, it's great to do a little bit of passive recovery in the form of mobility exercises too. That's a really good form of passive recovery. So if you've got easy access to it, it's really great. If you've got to make a whole trip and story out of it, then I go with the mental fatigue that it generates by forcing more discipline on you is probably means that it's less effective.
All right, brilliant. Lindsay, let's talk about sort of tracking and monitoring recovery because it's not the same all the time. I mean, we're in different training cycles. We might be training for a 5K versus training for a marathon. So your recovery needs from a training perspective are going to differ over time. Environmental factors impact the way you recover, heat and humidity, cold, that sort of thing. But let's talk about how we actually track it and what are we looking for long term, and are there gadgets and tools in that we can use to actually make it a little bit easier on ourselves to track this and make sure that we are recovering sufficiently, and how do we adjust it? I think that's also the point is how do we improve our recovery once we've got this information?
Yeah, so that's great. And I'm going to go through a little hierarchy again, just because it makes it much easier to explain. But on a very superficial, high level governance of yourself is like, how do I feel? Okay. So then you're going to monitor things like fatigue, pain, discomfort, niggles. And it's quite important to differentiate here because a lot of people, when I ask, are you sore? They don't classify stiffness, muscle soreness as sore. So that's when I ask, are you sore? People think I'm asking injury. No, I mean, because that's the obvious one. Even though it's super obvious, some people will still try and train through the injury. But no, that's not what I'm asking. It's like, right, how do I feel? Is there pain? Any pain? Slight, very mild discomfort in the muscles in response to a race, a hard training session, overdoing it for whatever reason. That's soreness that we need to address. Okay, so that's on this kind of upper level, superficial level is there stiffness and soreness present? Then I need to adjust what I'm doing. So that means I overreached. Okay, I don't have to stop exercising necessarily, but it brings into play things like non-impact cardiovascular exercise for a day or two, just so that I can allow that stiffness in the muscles to go away. That stiffness is damage, and the pain you're feeling is inflammation. There's not a lot of space in the muscles, so when there's like swelling on a cellular level, that's the pain that you're feeling. It's a pressure pain, and it's telling you that yesterday's or the day before session, because it can take 2 days for that to surface, was too hard. So I need now 24 to 48 hours of much lower impact cardiovascular exercise. So that's where you'd go with that. Then I'm walking upstairs. Now, I'm training hard, I'm getting fitter. I shouldn't be struggling to take stairs. Like there might be a very low level fatigue, that's fine. But if you're taking stairs and going like, yo, feels like I'm in the middle of a interval set or in the middle of a hill set, then your legs are very tired. You don't necessarily need rest at that point, but you definitely don't need a hard session. Okay, so that's again where I would push a long run 24 hours later. I'd push a speed work session 24 hours later. I might still run. I would definitely consider cross training, but that's not necessary to do. But some modification, I think that's the important thing. Then we'll dive into the wearables. Our watches tell us a lot. So if we look at our resting heart rate and track that over time, that gives us good clues about whether we are recovering or not. And then, of course, the newest tech is the heart rate variability and tracking it through either your watch generally or through things like Aura Rings or Whoop. Those are kind of seen as the gold standard for it. But what those are doing is really on a physiological level, giving you a little window to what's happening inside you. So from a pure heart rate perspective, we are taking that every day, and what we are looking at is of changes of about 5%. So if you're a 40 resting heart rate, changes of up to like 2 to just under. So if you go up to 44, 45, so let's call it 5 to 10%, that's where you're like, okay, I'm fine. I need to keep an eye on this. I wouldn't do anything about it, but I keep an eye on it. And if that persists for 3-4 days, I'd probably look at making some small changes to my plan. Once it goes to 47, 48 beats, so in other words, we start to approach that 15 to 20% definite modification needed in the training. And often I'll just rest a day just to see what happens and make sure that I'm not getting sick. So that's the kind of important thing for me. With the heart rates, I typically give a day or two to kind of figure out what's happening before I make too much of a drastic change. HRV is a little bit different. HRV is a little bit more sensitive, and it gives us a good window into like what's happening on a nervous system level within our bodies. Okay, so it tells us if there's a high degree of stress present or if things are really nasty and bad. So that's really what HRV is telling us. And so we're looking at bigger numbers rather than smaller numbers. And it's also quite unique to the individual. And there's a very large variability between male and female. Okay, so generally, I would listen to the device to tell you where you are and how well your heart rate variability is, and keep track of it. So sometimes I'll have a really bad night's sleep, and my HRV will be pretty low. But then I know why my HRV was so low. So I'll carry on with training as normal and see how the next day goes. But if I have a great night's sleep and I know I've been training quite hard and my HRV is very low, then I'm like, okay, I don't know why I'm like this. I'm going to consider changing my training plan today and see how we go. But if you track these things over the long term, Brad, then you can start to see if you're recovering well, and you can add in these recovery modalities. And then over 7 to 14 days, because you've got all this backup data, you can start to see how these different recovery modalities are helping and improving your HRV, heart rate, sleep, etc.
Gee, Lindsay, I love that. I mean, this is genuinely, I think, one of the best pieces we've done on recovery. Like just sitting here listening to it, I think we've pretty much covered all bases. I know we get a lot of questions about this, and if you do have any questions or follow-up questions, please feel free to click on the link that's with this video or on the podcast player you're listening, and you can submit your question for one of our Q&A episodes. If you want to delve a bit deeper on one of these topics, you're more than welcome to do that. And then also, Lindsay, recovery, I said it at the start of this recording that it is one of the cornerstones of what we do here at Coach Parry, particularly with our Faster Beyond 50 training frameworks. It is one of the pillars of what we do, and we speak about it in our masterclass, where we teach people how they can run Faster Beyond 50. And I'm going to share the link to that. If you want to check out that masterclass, it's one of 5 pillars recovery is, and you want to learn about the other 4 and how to improve your running, then make sure that you click on the link that's on screen right now and join us one of our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 masterclasses. It is superb. It's about 90 minutes with Q&A, and yeah, we dive deep into how you can improve your running performance. As always, Lindsay, I love doing these. Thank you so much for your time today, being super generous, and we look forward to catching up again soon. Don't forget, if you are listening on your favorite podcast player, please do leave us a like or leave us a review. It just helps us find or puts this podcast in front of other runners like you as well. And we want to try and help as many people as we can run for many, many years to come into their 50s, 60s, and beyond. Until next time, from Lindsay Parry and myself, Brad Nadoff, it's cheers.